Welcome to my music theory and reading music course. You can read every lesson in this series at your ease at pianotheoryexercises.com, where you will also find interactive exercises to practice what you've learned. Below this video you will find links to those lessons and exercises on the website. Also below this video you will find a link where you can download this whole music theory course as a free ebook, so don't miss this opportunity. And if my lessons helped you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot! In this third lesson of the music theory series, we're going to speak about intervals. So first of all, what are intervals? In music, an interval is the distance between two notes. This distance can be a small distance, like for example between E and F, but it can also be a larger distance, between D and B, for example. Let's start with the smallest interval. The smallest interval is the interval that you can create between a note and the note that is just next to this note on the right or left side. So for example, between E and F, or between G and G sharp, or between D flat and D, etc. We call such an interval a halftone interval. As you can see, a halftone interval can be between a white note and a black note. So between C and C sharp, for example. It can also be between a black note and a white note, so for example between E flat and E. But it can also be between two white notes. So for example from E to F, or from B to C. You can also see that it's not possible to have a halftone interval between two black notes, since between two black notes there's always a white note. So that's the halftone interval. A whole tone is the interval of two halftones added up. Let's start for example on the D. One halftone up brings us to D sharp or E flat, and one more halftone up brings us to E. Which means that the distance between D and E is that of a whole tone. Other examples of whole tone intervals are from F to G, from A to B, well, etc. Now, it's not only possible to have whole tone intervals between white notes, you can also have whole tone intervals between two black notes. For example, from F sharp to G sharp, or you can also say from G flat to A flat, or from D flat to E flat, or you can also call it from C sharp to D sharp. It's even possible to have whole tone intervals between a black note and a white note, for example from E flat to F, or between a white note and a black note, for example from B to C sharp. So that's the whole tone interval. Now, after the halftone and the whole tone, let's look at larger intervals. Now, to start with, I will only look from C to other white keys. So from C to D, from C to E, from C to F, to G, to A, to B, and till the next C. So let's start. We start on the C, and we go to the D. Now, as we have seen, we call this interval a whole tone. But there's also another name. We can also call this interval a second. Now, why do we call this interval a second? Well, this has to do with major scales. Now, if you haven't seen major scales yet, I can just tell you that all the white keys from C to C is just the C major scale. Now, in this C major scale, C is the first note and D is the second note. So that's where the name second comes from. So this is just another name for the whole tone interval. Let's continue. So again, from C now to E is called a third. Well, when this is a second and this is a third, then this is a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh. Now, that's very easy. So you would think that this interval is an eighth. Well, it's not called an eighth, we call it an octave. But this comes just from Latin, where octavus just means eighth. So one more time. interval from C to D a second. This is a third, a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh octave. It's interesting to see how many halftones and whole tones go into all those intervals that we just mentioned. Now, to start with the second, this is just one whole tone, or two halftones. That's easy. So let's go on with the third, from C to E. Well, as you can see, this is two whole tones, from C to D and from D to E. You can also say four halftones, from here to 1, 2, 3, 4. Four halftones. So a third is two whole tones or four halftones. A fourth. Well, as you can see, this is only a halftone more than the third. So it's 2.5 whole tones, or you can also say 5 halftones. Let's continue with the fifth. Well, that's even 1 whole tone more than a fourth. So that's 3.5 whole tones or 7 halftones. From C to A, the sixth. Well, even 1 more whole tone. So that's 4.5 whole tones or 9 halftones. From C to B, the seventh. It's even 1 whole tone more. So 5.5 whole tones or 11 halftones. And then finally the octave from C to C. Well, that's 6 whole tones or 12 halftones. Now, there's one interval that I haven't been speaking of yet, and that's the unison. Now, the unison is the interval of a note to itself. So, for example, from C to C, or from G to G, or from B flat to B flat. Now, this sounds a bit funny, an interval from the note to itself. How can you speak of an interval from a note to itself, since there is no interval, there is no distance? Yes, that's true, but you could call that a distance of 0 whole tones or 0 halftones. So we consider that also an interval, the unison. 0 whole tones, 0 halftones. Till now, we've seen the intervals from C till the next C and all the white keys in between. What about the black keys? So let's look at that. So from C to all the other black keys till we arrive at the next C. Let me first move on to the interval from C to E flat before telling you a little bit more about the interval from C to D flat. From C to E flat is 1, 2, 3 halftones, and we call this interval a minor third. Oh, wait a minute. This was the third. Well, actually, we call this interval not just the third, but the major third. Now, when this is the major third, this interval, which is a halftone smaller than a major third, is called the minor third. So, we have major intervals and minor intervals. In this case, the major third interval and the minor third interval. And now I come back to the interval from C to C sharp or D flat. Remember that we called the interval from C to D a second. Well, actually, we call that a major second, which makes this interval from C to D flat a minor second. Now, perhaps it's a little bit confusing that we call this interval a whole tone but also a major second, and this interval a halftone but also a minor second. Well, let me say that the official name is actually major second, minor second, and whole tone, halftone is a little bit less official. But to be honest, we use halftone and whole tone a lot more than minor second and major second. Okay, let's move on to the other black keys. The next interval is from C to F sharp or G flat. But I will wait a little bit with this one. I will first move on to the interval from C to A flat. Now remember that the interval from C to A was called a sixth. Well, actually this is a major sixth, which makes this interval from C to A flat a minor sixth. The last black note from C to B flat. And also here, remember that from C to B we called a seventh. Well, actually this is called a major seventh interval, which makes this interval from C to B flat a minor seventh interval. So again, which intervals can be major and minor? That's the major second, minor second, major third, minor third, major sixth, minor sixth, and major seventh, minor seventh. Now you may ask yourself, why don't we call this a major fifth and this a minor fifth? Well, we don't do that, because the interval of a fifth is not a major or a minor interval. We call this a perfect interval. The fifth is not the only perfect interval. There are other perfect intervals. The fourth is also a perfect interval, which means that there are no major or minor fourth, just the perfect fourth. There are two other perfect intervals, the octave and the unison. So we have major and minor intervals and perfect intervals. Now, to be honest, I do very often just say fifth, fourth, octave and unison without the mention of perfect, but officially you should. Okay, we have one interval left. That was the interval from C to F sharp or G flat. We cannot call this a minor fifth, as I explained to you before, because the fifth is a perfect interval, and a perfect interval cannot become a minor interval. So, from C to F sharp, let's first have a look to how many whole tones there are between the C and the F sharp, or G flat. From C to D is one whole tone. From D to E is also a whole tone, so that makes already two whole tones. And from E to F sharp is another whole tone, so that's three whole tone intervals. We call this interval a tritone interval, and tritone actually just means three tones, three whole tones, because tri means three. It's a bit a special interval, because look at the interval from F sharp or G flat to the next C, an octave up. That's one whole tone, two whole tones, three whole tones. So from C to F sharp or G flat is three whole tones. From F sharp to C is also three whole tones. So this is also a tritone interval. It means that a tritone interval divides an octave exactly in two equal parts. Okay, did we now see all the interval names? No, unfortunately not. Because we also have augmented and diminished intervals. Now, I will not discuss them in this video, but I explain them in the article which is mentioned in the description below this video. So just click on the link in the description and read everything about diminished and augmented intervals in the article. Now, one other thing. We've looked only from intervals from the note C to other notes. But you can of course also look to intervals from an other note. Let us look, just as an example, to intervals from the note A to all the other notes. To do so, you could use the table with all the distances of the intervals in half or whole tones. For example, from A to B, as we know, is a whole tone, but we would call it a major second, which makes this a minor second. A major third was two whole tones away from the basic note. So from A, this is one whole tone, two whole tones. So from A to C sharp is a major third. When we make a major third interval a half tone smaller, from A to C, then we have a minor third interval. So we can go on in the same way to determine all the other intervals. From A to D is a perfect fourth. From A to E is a perfect fifth. From A to F sharp is a major sixth. Now perhaps you don't see that directly, but just count the number of whole and half tones. For a major sixth interval, we need 4.5 whole tones. So from A, that's 1 whole tone, 2 whole tones, 3 whole tones, 4 whole tones, 4.5 whole tones. So when this is a major sixth interval, then this is a minor sixth interval. Let's look at the major seventh. Well, that was 11 half tones or 5.5 whole tones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half. So from A to G sharp is a major seventh. 1 half tone smaller, from A to G is a minor seventh. And of course from A to A is an octave. Another way to find the intervals, for example from the note A, is to look at the A major scale. Now, if you haven't seen the major scales yet, then just use the method I just said. But if you know what a major scale is, then just take all the notes from A major. Then from A to the second note is a second, to the third note a third, the fourth note a fourth, fifth note a fifth, sixth note a sixth, seventh note a seventh, and the eighth note an octave. Those are all perfect and major intervals. From there you can find all the minor intervals. The only one that remains is the tritone. And there you have all the intervals from the note A. Do you want to have more information about intervals? Are you looking for extensive tables with intervals, or are you looking for interactive exercises to train the intervals? Then have a look at the article on pianotheoryexercises.com. You can find the link in the description below the video.